I want you to think of your oldest friends, the ones that you've known basically forever. Think about that history you've got, going back years, I don't know, maybe even decades at this point. There's a weight to that, isn't there? Like, you can't measure it in pounds, but that history is so ingrained into your being that it almost has a palpable presence all of its own. It's the weight of time, the weight of understanding, like you've known this person for so long that regardless of the truth, it still feels like you basically know everything about them. After all, you were there to see it all with your own eyes, weren't you? Fiction has only ever made me feel that emotion, that sort of incorporeal weight, on a very few rare occasions. And it's most often happened when I literally spent my adolescence growing up alongside the characters I was reading about, or when I waited for Harrison Ford to age 30 years. Even the video games that manage to capture that feeling are almost all sprawling epics like Mass Effect that take 100 hours across a decade's worth of titles to do so. And even then, they too are mostly concerned with capturing just a specific moment in time rather than exploring the breadth of someone's entire life. And yet, there is one video game that manages to recreate that same weight of understanding that can take a decade or more to form in just 3 hours. To the Moon is an almost singular game in how it presents itself. A character study following the entirety of a single man's life, told entirely in reverse. It starts its story by introducing a dying, emotionally ravaged man, then slowly spends its runtime revealing to the player how he got there. It's all about this guy, Johnny, and the story picks up with him on his deathbed. And he has this dream that he never got to fulfill to go to the moon. He doesn't even really remember why he wants to, but that doesn't stop him from calling up Sigmund Corp, a company that's sort of like a science fiction Make-A-Wish foundation. They've developed this fancy whiz-bang gizmo that can rewrite memories. The only problem is that the strain of rewriting a person's memories makes their brain short out, and they die. But leave it to capitalism to find a way to market literally anything. These memory-altering death machines are used exclusively at the behest of those who are already dying anyway. For a few golden moments before your brain shuts off, you effectively get a second shot at life. You can rewrite past mistakes and enable dreams you never accomplished. If you're already gonna die anyway, you might as well die satisfied. But here's the catch. Just flooding Johnny's memories with a bunch of moon exploration propaganda isn't enough to get him there. In order to achieve Johnny's wish, our POV characters, Drs. Neil Watts and Ava Rosaline, have to figure out what motivations are driving it. To alter the course of Johnny's life, they have to understand it in its entirety, and as a player along for the ride, we have to as well. So how does To the Moon deliver that experience in just a few short hours? Well, for one thing, the game cuts out almost all gameplay, leaving only these little puzzles that you can blow through in just a few seconds. It's been labeled an adventure game in the past, but with a bit of hindsight, I'd say it's more of a precursor to other games like Gone Home or Tacoma, where the main gameplay hook, so to speak, is a unique way you go about sifting through another character's life by exploring the spaces they lived in, discovering items they valued, and eavesdropping on key conversations they have. To the Moon's gameplay hook, then, is the way you travel backwards through Johnny's memories. Each section usually starts with you teleporting in, then you get a few minutes of dialogue to set up the memory and convey a few key points, then finally you get to explore around the area for 5 mementos. Narratively, mementos are like how in flashbulb memories you can remember the smell of a particular moment, or the taste of something you happen to be eating, or one particular image you remember, and that's just permanently burned into your brain. Mechanically, this means exploring the memory you're in for 5 different objects to click on. Some of them are incredibly easy to find. If you ever see a jar of pickled olives, you're guaranteed to get a quick and easy memento. But other times, you can do an unfortunate amount of clicking around on all the walls trying to find the last damn memento you need to move on. Finding the mementos is easily the driest part of To the Moon's gameplay. But once you finish doing that, you find the exit, do a simple puzzle, and teleport to the next memory and you're back at the start of the loop. And all of that happens at a remarkable pace. Excluding sections where Neil and Ava are revisiting or altering scenes we've already been to, Johnny's entire life gets covered in only 19 memories, and a vast majority of them are only 3 to 4 minutes long, including the gameplay. To the Moon scenes are always given the time they're needed to breathe, but each one of them is laser focused on imparting 1 or 2 pieces of information at a time, often with a few important topics in the dialogue and one showing up in the mementos. But arguably, those silent little mementos are some of the most important details in each scene. That's largely because of how Gao designs a game, which is almost the same way someone constructs a mystery. He figures out an endpoint first, and then he builds everything else to lead into it. I like the way he put it in an interview with Eurogamer best. He said, "Almost all of the projects I've worked on, what happens is that before I do anything else, I picture myself as the audience at that exact moment when the credits roll. And I think about, what do I want to feel at that particular moment? Because that is when everything culminates. I don't really know what the story is about, I just capture that feeling and then head back and write the story to achieve it." And just like how most murder mysteries start by introducing little clues to signal who the killer is while the main action is going on in the foreground, Gao uses these mementos to provide little details about who these characters are and how they got that way. They rarely call attention to themselves, and at first just feel like a bunch of busywork you have to slog through before you can get back to the fun bits. And amusingly enough, that boredom served to be the greatest camouflage possible for these clues, because I barely paid any attention to them when I first played this game. But certain important mementos recur enough times that the clue is still fresh in your mind. You just don't know what to do with it because you haven't gotten the required context to understand it yet. To the Moon has two main narrative threads, one explaining what's going on with Johnny, and one focused on his wife, River. Both narrative through lines land on one of those arrival points that Gao was talking about, and those arrival points recontextualize all those mementos I was grudgingly hunting down. Perhaps just as Gao intended, when they were recontextualized, all of those innocuous little clues clicked together into something far more powerful, and I started feeling that weight I was talking about at the beginning. And to illustrate what I'm describing, I want to talk about olives. You heard me. One little tidbit you pick up about Johnny very early on is that he's developed a bit of a love for pickled olives. No matter which memory you find him in, there's usually a jar of them close by, to the point where it's a running gag that he must be obsessed with the stuff. This guy can remember those dang olives better than the face of his own best friend. But they wouldn't be so prominent for no reason, so here's where we're diving into spoilers. Another seemingly innocuous detail you learn early on is that his mother calls him Joey, and it's a thing he kinda just laughs off as a silly nickname. But then later we also get this scene where his mother uses that name again in private, and he seems much less okay with it. But beyond that, this random detail doesn't call any attention to itself until an hour later when you hit one of the game's biggest reveals. Johnny used to have a brother named Joey, and you find this out by watching him die. And when Joey died, his mother had a mental breakdown and started thinking Johnny was his dead brother, essentially wishing the two had switched places. What was previously an errant detail about a silly nickname is suddenly painted as John's mother, literally trying to force him to be another person to assuage her own anguish. And he understandably is not very cool with that. And you might think, shit, that sounds pretty bad. But this gut punch is a 1-2, because when Johnny was a kid, he hated pickled olives. His brother Joey was the one obsessed with them. But as time went on, that clearly changed. In fact, in that very memory where we see Johnny get upset about being called Joey, one of the mementos you have to find is a jar of pickled cucumbers. When it happens, it's played as a bait-and-switch gag, but when you look at it in hindsight, it almost suggests an active effort from Johnny to develop a liking for pickled olives, with him trying to learn to like normal pickles before graduating up to their olive cousins. Despite resenting how he's being shoehorned into his brother's role, he still ends up slipping into it in some respects, anyway. And one small sign of it is that he becomes obsessed with pickled olives. None of what I just said is ever explicitly stated. The game's already done enough groundwork that it doesn't have to say a single word. It can skip over entire decades of Johnny's life, including 90% of his childhood, but by showing us these little details throughout the entirety of his life, To the Moon gives the player the ability to fill in all those gaps in a heartbeat, to build this image of a kid spending his entire teenage years running from his mother's influence over him, only to inevitably end up right back there anyway. And then you feel it. That's the weight that I keep going on about. I know Johnny better than almost any other video game character I've ever interacted with. Heck, literally better than Johnny knows himself even. I've just spent 3 hours learning everything about him, from his smallest idiosyncrasies like his obsession with pickled olives, to the tragic, life-changing reasons behind why he has them. And To the Moon pulls that trick off twice. Johnny's wife River arguably has the more interesting arc, and in trying to make my point, I've almost criminally sidelined her importance in this game. And if you haven't played it, I'll leave that arc unspoiled so you can enjoy it yourself, because you absolutely should. To the Moon recently got a major re-release on Switch that updated the game with a whole bunch of basic quality of life improvements, like having an actual widescreen resolution, so it's actually never been a better time to try and enjoy this game. Because not a lot of games can convey the same specific feelings that To the Moon does, and most of the ones that do accomplish it by either having you spend 100 hours with that character at your side, or by letting them age with you through a decade of real-life time. And a game that can miraculously reproduce that exact same feeling in just a few hours? Well, that deserves to be called a classic. Hey guys, I hope you enjoyed this first rendition of my new series of 5-hour classics, but before you go, give my Patreon a gander. I want to make more videos like this one you just watched more often, but there are only so many hours in a day, and this isn't my main job. I know the economy is in a bit of a rough place, and Patreon is probably the last place you want to spend your savings, but if you do get a spare buck of disposable cash, it would get me a little bit closer to working on the channel full-time and making videos like this more frequently. So if you like this, you know how to get more. But either way, thanks for watching this far. I hope you enjoyed this episode of 5-Hour Classics, and I'll see you all next time.